If you want to sail around the world solo, the first question isn't how, it's what boat do you do it in? A boat is a tool, and its job is to keep you alive.
Well, I'm on a mission to do just that, a solo, non-stop sail around the world. But before I can do it, I've got a few problems to overcome, and one of them is finding the right boat to do it in. Now, I haven't sailed for a while, and I've never sailed solo, so I plan to split this mission into 3 stages. Firstly, a sail around the UK to relearn some old skills, followed by a few ocean crossings to learn some new ones. And then one of the greatest challenges a person can take on, a solo non-stop sail around the world. So with those journeys in mind, what does this boat need to be?
Well, let's start with the basics. It needs to handle rough weather with confidence. I don't want this journey to be the last bit of excitement I ever have. I also need to be able to manage it on my own, sailing solo in any weather conditions. It's going to be my home for a while, so a decent-ish level of comfort would be nice. I'm not expecting a 5-star hotel, but somewhere livable. Given some of my health conditions, I'd like it to be reasonably easy to get on and off, particularly when I'm at anchor. And it needs enough storage space, plus somewhere I can set up a small workspace to do a desk job.
There are some things you just can't change on a boat, and I need to get those right from the start. I'm looking for something small enough to handle solo, but also big enough to look after me when the weather turns rough. And I'm thinking somewhere between 35 and 42 feet is the sweet spot. I've sailed a Catamaran before and it was great. They offer a very stable and comfortable ride with plenty of space, both in the interior and on deck. Its shallow draft meant that we could go to places that other boats couldn't get to, and the twin props made parking in a marina a breeze. But the best part was that on most points of sail, it was faster than a monohull. But catamarans are very stable right up until the point when they aren't. If you capsize one, there's almost no chance of recovery. They generally don't sail as well upwind, and they can slam in heavy weather. But the biggest downside for me is that they are much more expensive to maintain and berth. A monohull, on the other hand, stands a much better chance of recovery if knocked down or capsized. They can generally sail upwind better, and the maintenance and mooring costs will be lower. And I'll be honest, they offer that kind of classic sailing feel I'm looking for. The downside is less space, less comfort, and less speed on most points of sail. And whilst I'm looking for that classic sailing feel, the rolling and pitching may not be compatible with one of my medical conditions. If I'm honest, a catamaran is probably the better tool for the job, which is why multi-hulls are used by many record-setting round-the-world sailors. But I'm not out to break any records, and because of its capsize potential, but also the catamaran's much higher running costs, a monohull is more likely to be the realistic choice. So the score is monohull 1, multi-hull 0. Steel boats are incredibly strong, and if you hit something, the hull will usually bend rather than break. And they're repairable pretty much anywhere in the world because steel welding is common. They're also very durable if well maintained, but the downsides are they're heavy, so they're going to need more wind to get them going, and rust is going to be a constant battle with a very high maintenance overhead. Any unnoticed pockets of water could spell disaster for the hull. Aluminium boats are incredibly strong for their weight, and they handle impacts well, usually denting rather than cracking. They don't suffer with rust, giving them a significant advantage over steel, but they can suffer with galvanic corrosion if electrical items aren't grounded properly on your boat or your neighbour's boat. They also require specialist repairs, as aluminium welding is a little bit more complex, but the biggest 2 problems with them are cost and availability. They're incredibly expensive, and they don't come up often on the UK market anyway. GRP is lightweight yet still very strong, and it's more affordable than steel or aluminium. It's also relatively easy to repair, and in many cases it's a DIY job. But osmosis can be an issue, and impact strength is not the same as steel or aluminium. If you hit something hard, the hull will probably crack rather than bend or dent. So which one's right for Sailing Vessel Hope? Well, in my childhood dream, it was always going to be a steel boat that I was going to do this in, but I'm more inclined to say that aluminium is the dream now. But honestly, GRP is the realistic option. So in the dream world, the score is aluminium 5, steel 3, GRP 2. But in reality, where cost and availability matter, it's going to be GRP 5, aluminium 3, steel 2. A long keel tracks well in a straight line and will naturally want to stay on course, making life easier for the helmsman or the autopilot on a long passage. They're strong, stable and forgiving if you run aground because they're part of the whole construction rather than being bolted on. But they're going to be slower to manoeuvre because of the larger wetted area, don't sail as well upwind, and may feel a bit sluggish and hard to tack in lighter winds. A fin keel will make for a much livelier sail. They're faster, more agile, point better upwind, and are much easier to manoeuvre in tight spaces. But they are more vulnerable because they're bolted on. They don't offer the same level of directional stability, and they will roll and pitch more in heavy weather. So which keel configuration is right for the Sailing in Hope mission? Well, there are a few others available, but for offshore work, I think a fin keel or a long keel is probably the best two options. But in my experience sailing, there's either too much wind or not enough wind at all. And I've also never sailed in a long keel boat. So I'm going to err on the side of what I do know and say that the score is fin keel 2, long keel 1. A sloop rig is by far the most common setup. One mast, one mainsail, one headsail. It's simple, efficient and well suited to solo sailing because there are fewer lines and sails to manage. They also perform quite well upwind. But the downside is, because there's only two sails, they lack flexibility in sail plans, which can make balancing the boat trickier in changing conditions. A Ketch rig spreads the sail area over two masts, making sail handling a lot easier and giving you lots of options for balancing the boat in heavier weather. But the downside is more rigging. An extra mast, an extra set of standing rigging and an extra set of running rigging. So it's a lot of rigging to maintain and manage. Also with three sails, the cutter rig is a versatile and well balanced setup. The extra head sail gives you more sail combinations which can be particularly useful in heavy weather. But again, it does mean more ropes and sails to manage, and the tacking process is going to be slightly more complicated, especially when sailing solo. I feel that this is probably one of the more difficult decisions that I've got to make. I can see the merits in all three different types of rig, although I've never sailed on a Ketch rig, just a cutter and a sloop. The other factor I have to take into account is that sloops are by far more common. Ketches and cutters are harder to come by. But the sloop is going to be the easiest to tack solo, but doesn't have the sail combination. The cutter is probably going to be the hardest to tack solo, but has far more sail combinations. And the Ketch is going to be somewhere in between when it comes to managing it solo, because you've only got that one head sail to get through the wind. But there is all that rigging that needs looking after, maintaining, which is going to add a lot of extra cost and time. So the score, I think I'm going to go with Sloop 2, Cutter 2, Ketch 1. To me, a boat with an aft cockpit looks sleeker, and they look larger than centre cockpit boats, and theoretically there should be less steps to get below deck, and there's a reason that that's important to me. But the aft cabins will be much smaller, and I'm told you get less protection from spray and less visibility. By comparison, a boat with a centre cockpit apparently offers better protection from spray and better visibility, and by comparison the aft cabins are luxurious, although I'm not sure how useful that would be whilst underway at sea. But they do look smaller, and there's probably going to be more steps to get below deck. Again, I think this is going to be another difficult decision because I have no experience sailing a centre cockpit boat. In theory, out in the ocean in following seas, it's going to reduce your risk of being pooped quite considerably, but I'm just not sure it's going to feel like the kind of sailing that I'm used to. And the extra steps in the companionway, which is an accident hotspot, I really don't want to break any bones in the Southern Ocean. If there are any centre cockpit skippers out there that want to put their oar in the comments, please do so. But the score has to be 0-0. So now we've defined the basics. It turns out we're looking for a 35 to 42 foot monohull made from GRP with a fin keel, sloop rig and an aft cockpit. The problem is that describes 95% of all sailing boats, so we need to head over to sailboatdata.com to do some more digging.
On sailboatdata.com, we can find detailed information on thousands of sailing boats. However, what we're specifically interested in are the sailboat calculations, as these can help us assess a boat's suitability for the three different stages of this mission. The first is sail area to displacement ratio, and this measures how much sail power a boat has compared to its weight. Generally, the higher the number, the better the performance and speed. Next is the ballast to displacement ratio, and this basically tells us how much of the boat's total weight is ballast, and it gives us an indication of the boat's stability. The displacement to length ratio compares a boat's weight to its waterline length. Lower values typically indicate a lighter, potentially faster boat, while higher values suggest a heavier boat that may offer greater carrying capacity and a more comfortable motion at sea. The comfort ratio is an estimate of how comfortable a boat's movement may feel in rough conditions, and while no calculation can perfectly predict motion at sea, higher numbers generally suggest a smoother ride, which can be important on longer passages.
It's all great stuff, but after analysing hundreds of boats and switching between the ad and the tech spec, things can become very confusing, and there's a very real danger of paralysis by analysis. There's also no real way of just visualising what a boat is good for and comparing one with another. So I came up with this.
The Sea Mammal Sail Scale is my totally unscientific way of translating yacht design compromises into something intuitive, allowing me to quickly visualise where a boat sits on the suitability spectrum for the three very different stages. At one end of the scale we have the Dolphin. These are the lighter, performance-focused cruising yachts, fast, agile and full of energy. They're exciting to sail, quick to pick up speed and react instantly on the helm, giving a real sense of connection with the boat. But that performance comes at a price. They need more attention from the crew, are less forgiving when the conditions get rough, and staying comfortable offshore often depends on both the weather and the crew's experience. Next up comes the Seal, the all-rounder. This is where most boats sit on the scale. The moderate displacement cruising yacht that balances performance, comfort and offshore capability. They have a more comfortable motion, better load carrying capacity and a lower workload on the crew. The trade-off is simple, less speed and less responsiveness under sail. Good at many things, but doesn't master just one. Then we move into whale territory. These are the heavy displacement offshore boats built for endurance. They track steadily, carry weight well and settle into a calm motion at sea. But they're slower, need more wind to perform and can feel sluggish in light airs. They're not about excitement, they're about getting there comfortably. And finally the blue whale, the expedition level boats, built for serious passage making in extreme conditions, maximum strength, autonomy and offshore stability. But they're heavy, deliberate and unhurried. They're not designed to be fast or playful, they're designed to keep going when everything else stops being comfortable. You can check out the Sea Mammal Sail Scale at sailinginhope.com/scale, where I've shared the AI prompt that I use to do all the maths. I would genuinely be interested in hearing what animal your boat is and what you think of the scale in the comments.
So now I have a way of visualising, categorising and comparing boats. It comes down to selecting which is the right sea mammal for the job.
I think for me, a Dolphin would excel at stage 1 and it would be okay for stage 2, but I'd probably have a few more grey hairs at the end of it. Stage 3 is a no-go for a Dolphin for me. It would be way too fast and flighty. A Seal would be good for stage 1 and 2, and whilst it probably could do a circumnavigation with stops, I think for me they are not up to a non-stop trip. A whale is the obvious choice for a solo circumnavigation, but even then it's going to have to be in top shape, the rigging, sails, systems, everything. It's going to be good for the Atlantic crossing, but not so good for the UK with lots of short runs and tight manoeuvring. And the same goes for the whale's bigger brother, the blue whale, although I'm going to award it a gold star for the world trip. However, these boats, for me, are prohibitively expensive.
Everything about boats is a compromise, and usually it's a trade-off between speed and comfort. But for me, it's also about adventure versus safety and dreams versus reality. Because while I sit here drinking tea in the kitchen and dreaming of sailing around the world, reality might have very different ideas. I do have some medical issues to deal with before I can even think about setting sail. And what feels achievable here might be very different offshore, alone, in the Southern Ocean. So there's a couple of ways that I could approach this decision. I could focus entirely on the core mission, a solo circumnavigation of the world, jump in feet first and go straight for a whale. It wouldn't be ideal for sailing around the UK, but it would be an inconvenience, not a danger. And it would keep the focus on the core mission. Or I could take baby steps, start with something smaller and better suited to coastal sailing while I deal with some of the medical what-ifs, and think about a bigger offshore boat later. But I think for now at least, the medical issues haven't quite broken my spirit enough to move away from the core mission. So it looks like we're going whale watching, but first, I'm probably going to need another cup of tea.